Welcome everyone to Your True Self. I'm Deb Courtney from debcourtney.com, and today I'm very fortunate that I've got a guest actually in my house rather than over Zoom, which is quite nice, and I'm a lot more relaxed, I think. So I've got Kylie Bonnor here. Kylie is a fellow creatrix transformologist, but she's also very experienced in understanding hormones, female hormones, and how we can actually work with that and make it, better for us, applying it to our lives. And sometimes we go in our ups and downs and don't always understand what it is that we're doing or why we're feeling certain things. And, when you're working with your business, and how is it that some days you feel like calling people and other days you might not, so how does that affect us with our hormones and understanding those sorts of things? So I've got and Kylie's also had to travel around a lot as a army wife.
Yeah.
So, a lot of readjusting all the time with that and how you cope with that, and children, and, you've been through quite a bit, so as lots of people have. So, so welcome. Thank you for coming to my couch.
Lovely. It's nice to do things in real life.
It is, especially with what's been going on, and we're always feeling like we're at a distance, and I think it's really healthy to be able to connect and actually, thrive off someone else's energy as well. Mm-hmm. I think that's kind of what you miss when you're doing a lot of the, your Zooms and things like that. You tend to miss that real energy that you pick up when you're together, with someone.
Yeah, well, it's just amazing. I find that the most amazing phenomenon, I think, of the Zoom world is that for 6 months last year that we were just all on Zoom, there was nothing coming back. And if I'd give a presentation, I could have given my best presentation, but I'd just feel crap at the end of it, just because if I'd given the same presentation in real life, just the feedback and the energy back, even if no one liked it, which I get a lot.
At least you can feel that.
People, but you can still feel it, but you still feel revved up because you've done it and you've felt it. Whereas when you're on Zoom, it's really disconnected.
Yeah, and I find that when I'm doing some of the lectures that we do, or I do, with the students, I love being in the lab with them, or in the actual classroom environment, doing it that way. It's great that we can work from home and do these sorts of things, but sometimes you feel like you're having a one-sided conversation.
Yeah, and the questions you get in person are never the same. Like I wouldn't even get half of the questions online, because I guess they don't feel safe maybe in that space, or they don't feel like, there could be people listening, so they don't want to share.
And that's understandable. So you've been through creatrix yourself as well, so I'm really interested to know what was your perspective and what you got out of it, and was it worthwhile for you?
Yeah, so I came to creatrix after a lot of shit, so I hope that's okay to say. Great.
As long as YouTube allows it, I do.
My biggest thing, I have kids with special needs, and I had done a lot of research trying to help them with their healing and natural therapies and not natural therapies, but up to the minute research, and I kept hitting brick walls in the neuroscience and epigenetic realm, because I had 2 kids. I have one with epilepsy. I have 3 kids actually.
There are 3. Oh, no, 3.
So, but I have one with autism and one with epilepsy, and so the 2 things were, I thought, different, but the more you learn, the more you realise how connected it all is. So even that epigenetic factor, like I could understand the genetic factor, but I couldn't quite get my head around the epigenetic factor, but I kept hitting brick walls. And I was very privileged enough to study under a professor in Melbourne to try and find the research that we needed for my kids, and he was fantastic in helping me figure out what was good research, what was bad research, what was, maybe a bit far out, but let's try it, because we were at sort of dead ends. So I had this space, but I also then had this professional life that I worked with Maz. So I had about a 15-year history of knowing her and seeing things that she'd done, but I wasn't coping because life, and life as an army wife, and life as a mum of kids with special needs, and life just in general. And I
can imagine that overwhelm that you must be
so much, and so one of my other colleagues said I needed to do this creatrix thing because it had sorted it all out, and I thought, nah, nothing can sort me out because I'm too far gone. But then a couple of months later, Maz put a post on about the epigenetics and how this creatrix thing was drawing in with this epigenetic stuff. And I'd been looking at the epigenetics for my children and had completely ignored the epigenetics of myself. So that's kind of where it came full circle. And so then with the stuff that I was doing in business, I wasn't doing too well because I had all this other stuff going on. And I thought, well, if this stuff's so good, then maybe the army people need it. And so I contacted Maz and went down that path. Yeah. And and the rest, as they say, is history. But what happened was that then Maz taught me about the female cycle and the female factor, which then linked in with some of the neuroscience-y stuff, and I could link it all to, I could just see the picture in my head. It all just linked how the hormones worked, and then the brain worked, and then the emotions connected in.
Or doesn't work.
Sometimes the brain doesn't work. It passes out like mine was. So it was really fascinating. So it just took me down a whole nother path, and then it just all fell into place. It's like everything I learnt, I already knew was there, but I didn't know it. And so then I just knew it, and I was like, wow. And so then I followed those little leads and ended up where I am now. So,
and where are you now?
Well,
apart from on my couch.
Here I am. So I work in a really interesting space of women with defence. But mind you, I tend to attract more people that aren't in defence. But anyway, I work in a space of women who've had trauma or live with people with trauma. So there's a lot of special needs parents or spouses and families of defence or emergency services, so police, fire, ambulance, or they're children who are sort of like my age. So like they've grown up with a dad, normally a dad, who's a police officer or whatever, and they have their traumas around that. And it could just be like they might have been a very loving dad, but then they'd blow up once a week because he got on the drink, or which then led into I don't feel worthy and all the other emotional factors. So and then I'm a period coach, and so from all of that was this absolute recognition that no one's connecting the trauma to the periods and the period issues. So everyone I had come to me, they were having these, maybe not even period issues, but like they'd had hysterectomies or they'd had all these different, whatever, like whatever the thing was, most women had some trauma around something, and then there was an issue with their period.
Interesting.
Or an emotion that was connecting to their work. And so and it's just not okay that we're not taught this stuff. Yeah. And so then I'm a girl on a mission about like teaching these things and teaching the whole connection, because it all can't go to the doctor for your sore shoulder, which connects to your neck, which is sore that you go to the chiropractor for, which then comes to some, then you go to the physio for your knee. Like it all connects.
Yeah. Yep.
But because no one's looking at it from that holistic approach, and back over in Victoria, that's what I was teaching the doctors about, the epigenetics and the trauma and that connection, and bring in the period stuff, and it's the whole picture. And even with the men, like the men have to know this stuff, because like my husband, he is fantastic.
I'm sure that they think that we have periods just to annoy them, so that there's always a reason why, not tonight, dear.
Got a headache.
But we really enjoy them.
Yeah, because they're so much fun. But that's the thing, when you teach the men how to understand and deal with it, like, so there's a certain time of the month, and even though my husband's fantastic, he never does this, which I think is funny, because he's heard me say it about 30 million times, but if he just runs me a bath and pours me a glass of wine or drink, takes the kids, that's the primary important factor, takes them so I don't have to deal with them, and then just goes away for a couple of hours, he'll come back to a renewed and revitalised wife who doesn't have a headache and doesn't feel like not tonight, because we're not actually supposed to feel that way. No. We're supposed to have as much sex drive, if not more, than they are. So, but we don't have it.
No. So why don't we? What's the? And is it is it diet related? I mean, obviously our diet has a massive impact on that. Obviously our hormones, but then if we're not controlling or understanding our hormones enough, or maybe there's like supplements that we need to do, or...
Well, again, it's that whole body factor, isn't it? Because if the emotional disconnect is not healed and dealt with, then there's a physical aspect, and then there's the hormonal aspect. And it's a chicken and egg thing. And for women, that's the thing, is that we've got more hormones because we have the estrogens and the progesterones and the ups and the downs that create the cycle to make life. But we also we've also got more stuff going on in our brain. Like our brain works a lot differently to a man's brain. A man's brain goes backwards and forwards stays pretty much in their own channels, and a woman's brain crosses over, and then it connects more to her heart, which connects to her uterus and her ovaries, which releases more hormones. So if you have an emotional problem, like if you get angry at something triggers you, like the kids do something silly and you get angry, then that cycle of the trigger happens and then the anger emotion happens. That leads into then the next feeling and the next feeling because of the hormones. But the thing is that if you had a trigger on, so say a woman horrifically was raped, and it was like on, say day 23 of her cycle, just say, like, I'm just picking random, then every time that those hormones are in exactly the same spot, she can be triggered without it being a trigger. Like, she doesn't have to get raped again. Nothing actually has to happen. But her emotions and her feelings will then match just because the hormones are there, and it creates a loop in our neural pathways. So it's not a one thing problem. It's like you've got to deal with the emotion and the trauma and we've got to heal that part, but we've also got to then change the neural loop pathways to stop the triggers happening at those places, which then link into the emotion of rape for women. So many factors, like they'll many times feel like they deserved it, or they caused it, or even if they didn't, and they might know that they didn't, but there's still those feelings or the shame, or how will anyone ever be able to love me again, or there's so many levels, even though we all know that that's not true and it wasn't her fault, but it just plays into so many other things because of all the different neural pathways that are there, which are fabulous if we know how to deal with it.
Yeah. And I'm very fortunate. I'm sure there's thousands and thousands and millions of women that have gone through that sort of trauma. I personally haven't, so I'm fortunate. But my small experience with something like that was a couple of years ago when someone actually spiked my drink. And, out with my girlfriends, just a quiet weekday night at a restaurant. And, I think there were 6 of us or whatever. And I suddenly, one of my friends was quite sick, and we just thought, that's weird, that's weird. Anyway, then I was like, so cleaned up the taxi, and then we went off, and I went home, and I was down visiting, so I was at my parents' house, and I just realised something wasn't right, and the whole world was spinning and all that. Anyway, ended up in ED, totally embarrassed and mortified, and just thinking I'm going to be judged.
Yeah.
And assumed that I've just drunk too much. And I've worked in ED, and you do, you see people coming in like that, and that assumption and that prejudgment, and then we're prejudging, we're judging ourselves. And so, I just thought, I'm sure, I didn't. It was a quiet night, we didn't eat lots, but it was just, so I was there going, doubting myself, thinking other people are going to doubt me with what I say, and being embarrassed. So to multiply that by 1,000 at least, probably, is I can see how people would feel that, and they're not that necessarily want to pursue and go to court, and then you've got those
there's a whole other gamut of things.
Exactly. So so being able to work with those people and get them through to go, all right, that wasn't my fault, and that whole judging yourself but worried about other people judging you is a massive thing for women, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the most massive thing. And I actually wonder, I'm not really versed up in the world of quantum physics and manifestation and things, but I know enough to know that how it seems to work. Like, I've done it. Like, I always get a good car park.
Yeah.
Always.
Do want to win that lotto.
Yeah, I haven't done that yet.
That's because there's still that doubt there that we can't win the lotto. Yeah.
So we then judge ourselves, and we're kind of putting it out there that they'll judge us, because if you aren't in that space, and actually on the flip side, a couple of months ago, I had a kidney stone, which the doctor, my GP, thinks was from running a marathon, so I did not suggest that. It was a couple of years ago.
Did you tell him that it was or wasn't?
What?
Running a marathon.
Well, he asked me, what did you do to get that? Because did you run a marathon? I was like, well, I did, but that was ages ago. And he was like, well, you don't grow a kidney stone.
Well, I'm impressed that you ran a marathon.
Yeah, you don't grow grow an over 1 centimetre kidney stone.
That's huge.
From
1 centimetre?
It was 1.1.
Oh my God.
It was huge.
That is huge, guys. That is really huge.
Painful. But anyway, so I went to the doctors at 4 o'clock in the morning, to the hospital with this excruciating pain. And I think the doctor thought that I was wanting drugs or on drugs. But because by the time she saw me, I'd actually had about 4 doses of drugs because the pain was off the charts. But she just made her mind up and she didn't treat me. And actually said she'd give me IV just to give me fluids because obviously it was just a stomach bug or something, if that was the case. And put me into another part of not ED, but like the day.
Yeah, the observation.
The waiting bit.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until shift, and that was right at the start of shift changeover. And it was not until after shift changeover the next time at 4 o'clock, the guy came in and saw me still being sick and charcoal vomit and stuff. And he was like, "Oh, I think we'd better get you to CT," and had me there in 5 minutes, like because he hadn't made this judgment.
No.
And whereas she had made that judgment, which I didn't realise at the time until, like, I was confused by it. Afterwards, I was like, she had judged me. So I guess because I wasn't coming from that space of I'm being judged, because I was not in any space to think that I would have a problem. Why would anyone judge me?
Well, I think...
because I've dealt with that.
Yeah, but I actually think that women are the worst at judging each other. And sometimes we blame, like we might say, the whole world is, but I think we really are bad at judging each other. Or, I've said a lot of the time for nursing, we are usually our own worst enemy because it is filled... it is a profession that is predominantly female. And there are amazing nurses out there, but for some reason, and I think it's a lot to do with our mindset of that blame, not feeling good enough, imposter syndrome, not worthy, all of those are then feeding into this predominant female profession, that we're all got our own issues going on, and then it just is, it's like an inferno of like judging and dragging each other down when we really are supposed to be the healers.
In the medical profession, you've got the nurses, but they always had to, they often historically saved the doctor's ass. It's like because they were the ones who had to know. But then you've got the female doctors coming through, this very patriarchal thing, and they have to fight vie for their right to be there. And even now, even in this day and age, they have to justify and prove themselves. We disregard that aspect of the whole thing. We go in there believing, having this perception that this is how it's going to be and this is what it is. We've also got our baggage that we're carrying with all that stuff in it. But then they've all got their baggage. And so then it just multiplies and combine and overflows often. Yeah. So, and that's the thing about it, isn't it? Like, if you're not getting the answers that you want from your doctors or from your caregivers or anyone, you've got to find something else. You've got to look somewhere else. You've got to be your own advocate, and you've got to know what you're advocating for. Yeah. And that is the thing with female stuff, because people will go to the doctors and say there's something wrong. In my case, I went to the doctors about 18 months ago saying there is something wrong, and I ticked every box of the ovarian cancer list, which, like, my periods had changed, this, that and the other. Like, I think there's 6 or 8 things that, they say if you've got any of these symptoms, go to the doctor. I had all of the symptoms. And when I went to the doctor, they dismissed it. They were like, "Oh, it'll be okay." And when I went back to the doctor, they said, "Oh, we'll send you for a scan." When I went back to the doctor, they said, "Oh, we'll do some bloods." And it took a long time. So then they said, "Well, there's nothing wrong with you, so we'll send you to a gynae." So then I went to the gynae, and then the gynae was like, "Oh, we'll just do a hysterectomy." And I was like, "Well, you just said there's nothing wrong. So why you want to
body part out if there's nothing wrong?"
And so then I said, "Oh, I'll just wait and I'll do a bit more research." And so then as I went in and did some more research, I discovered that, well, firstly, I asked about 30 friends who I knew had had a hysterectomy, because I worked with women for 20 years, so I knew a lot of women who'd had it. And they all had it when their kids, their daughters, were coming into their periods. None of them had ever talked to anyone about it, but all of a sudden I'm like, "What? Hang on." And my daughter had just come into her period, so had menarche and begun her menses space. And
right, so I'm never going to have a hysterectomy. I've got 3 boys.
Well, I think it can happen with boys as well because of how our hormones react and talk to each other. But that's my long-term passion project. One day I'll get some nerd to study that, because I do believe, and because my husband goes away all the time, when he goes away my testosterone increases to get through. Yeah. But there's no medical evidence of that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But I know it does
with a FIFO FIFO families then, like with that whole...
So same.
You know,
so
yeah.
the good thing about, and the beauty of FIFO is that it's much more consistent than defence. So any research that'll be done will probably be done with FIFO families.
Yeah, you can get the...
Because it's very routine.
Yeah.
And then you can study women in their cycles with the blood test, because you'll need blood tests to prove it all. So, but I do have to find a nerd for that. So if you know any nerds in the pathology department,
please contact
send them my way.
Social media.
It's not because my area is not research and study, but I keep landing there. But I just see that this is a very big missing link for women's health in general, but also in that space of mums at home with kids that are busy, husbands that go away. You sacrifice anyway because your partner's not there. I said husband, sorry, but partners. But even lesbian relationships, one female goes away, it still changes the hormones. Yeah. And so,
And you can see it when I grew up in a family of women and two sisters, so 3 girls, and I've got 3 boys. And you see so often and you hear so often that, the family, the household syncs up quite often with their periods, and they find a bit of a poor parents, poor fathers.
Well, so they've actually now
bam, bam.
They've actually now disproven that
really?
Theory. Yeah. So they did think for a long time, and the theories around that were that people ate the same when they lived together. And historically or evolutionarily, because it's way more than historical, like it's long term, we cycled with the moon. And because, and if you think about caveman time, we would have had to, because if we were bleeding and that smell, which was to attract a mate, well, it's actually to clear it out, but that it attracts animals. Clear out the mate, yeah.
Clear out.
So it would attract animals. So you had to bleed when it wasn't light, because then the animals couldn't. You were able to save yourself. They wouldn't be able to attack. They couldn't find you as easily.
Yeah.
And then the full moon is when you ovulated, and you had to have light and more energy. And we had that because you're more vibrant. Like when you are ovulating, breasts are bigger and your hair's more beautiful and your skin's very clear. They perk up a bit.
Really? Oh, really? Really?
So
I haven't noticed anymore after
you got to roll them up.
3 breastfed children.
Roll them up.
There's no perking, I'm pretty sure.
Well, there is.
I'll try and think back.
So there's a whole lot of other factors that come into it, and then the energy's high, and you would have mated because the whole tribe was together and dancing, and everyone's out for a great time. Pheromones are high. Wow.
They couldn't hear you. They were all dancing, singing.
And that is kind of fascinating, because when you think about it, you're just like, well, yeah, actually
that makes sense.
It makes so much sense.
Yeah.
No one teaches this stuff.
No, not at all. None of that. Like that doesn't happen in universities. It doesn't happen in schools. Like it's all very, this is what happens. It's quite mechanical, really. It's quite the whole human biology is so fascinating. Like I absolutely love it, but what's teaching is very mechanical, but also when we teach anatomy and physiology and things, we're teaching in body systems, your respiratory system, your endocrine system, so we're teaching these systems in silos, and then what happens is when you're assessing people, you tend to be assessing them in silos and not realising that and this is so advocate for holistic care, is that it isn't a silo, if you've got
works together and connect.
So if someone's got respiratory problems, then what is it that they've been doing? And maybe it's been that they're smoking. Okay, what's that's just a general example. What is it that's smoking? What caused them to smoke in the first place? And so on and so on, and we can start to now look at that it's, something that made them start when they were young. What was it? They wanted to look cool. Okay, what was that from wanting to look cool?
Wanting to
belong.
To Maslow's hierarchy.
So it is hard, and that's what happens now in specialties is, you always have a specialist that you see, and what needs to happen is that they need to talk. They need to talk with each other and go, this is what I'm seeing, what are you seeing, and how can we...
and how does that interconnect?
Exactly.
And I think the biggest thing for me in part of my journey was that even though I knew all this stuff about women's bodies and how they kind of cycled and how there was, you know, a few better days of energy and a week that you should just relax because it's better for your body and your systems and recovery and things. What happened is that then in some of my research, there's a beautiful book called Activate Your Female Power, and in that book the author has done some drawings as well as some pictures. One of them made me realise, and one of the stories made me realise, that the ovaries aren't attached to the end of the uterine ducts or the fallopian tubes. They're actually separate. They come off the uterus. And yeah, and there's these amazing little fingers that reach down and massage the cyst, which is kind of like a pimple if you sort of think about it, which is the egg just becoming... So the follicular stage is when the egg is being nourished to be able to become an egg from the follicle, and it bursts like a pimple, but like a cyst, and the little fingers at the end of the uterine ducts grab it. Well, in the medical model, and what I was taught and what they're still teaching in school today, although they are starting to put the little lines in, is that these ovaries are just on the end of the fallopian tubes and they release the egg and it happens. But actually it's a phenomenon when an egg is captured. Like, this thing knows to reach down and capture the egg when it's time to burst. That's a phenomenon, and we don't realise how amazing that is. And Sharon, the author, shares a story of this lady who had lost an ectopic pregnancy and had lost a uterine duct and an ovary on the other side, and was told she'd never had children. And the other uterine duct knew to reach down and capture the egg from the ovary, and she ended up having like loads of kids, like 7, I think, after that.
Oh my god!
So, no kids for you. But all
Did
because
they do a psych assessment?
Yes, you need it.
Oh my lord!
After 3, I need it.
I don't know. Same here.
Apparently, after the 4th one, you're fine. You go back to normal.
Oh right.
Yeah,
I'm not going to
find out.
Too late now, anyway.
Yep, never gone there. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's the body. Like, you know, we try and do all of these things, but really our body has these amazing innate ways of healing itself, if only we would allow it and give that time to do it. And that's where, you know, I think with the cycle, as well as acknowledging the cycle, knowing there are days that are going to be sometimes a bit shit, and some days that we're going to be great, and it's just, you know, going with that and going with the flow, so to speak.
Well, and actually, if you go with the flow, you get less days of that shit. Like, you get... we're not meant to have PMS, and we're not meant to have mood swings. In menopause, you're not meant to have hot flushes. You shouldn't even know that you've hit menopause except you stop having a period. No one should know you've got a period except that there's blood when you go to the bathroom. It's not normal, it's common, but they've made it normalised because they took it away from women, actually. They made it very masculine, and they wanted us to be the same as men, and all of our medical tests are based on that, and we don't fit. Well, actually, we're the gold standard, and they should be testing us.
Yeah,
so,
they should be testing us.
If you go back to year 8 science, like, this, you've got to do this, and this, and remove variables. Well, we are the variable, so you can't remove us, and they've tried, and it's not working.
And most scientific studies are based on men.
Yeah. And even when that became a thing, that people argued about it, then they said, okay, we'll start testing on women. But their standard of women was male mice that they cut the testicles off to make them female. Well, it doesn't make you female.
It doesn't make you female.
You're still a friggin' male. Just...
Every cell in the body is male. Like, every cell in that body is in male.
And yeah.
You know, so you're not changing that.
It's not affected. And even if you then injected female hormones, it still doesn't make it female because it's still a male reacting to female. Yeah.
It's totally fascinating. So a lot of your, you know, the people that you're speaking to, they've been through a lot of different modalities to try and figure themselves out and understand themselves. And sometimes, you know, maybe we don't need to understand ourselves as much. We just want to kind of get rid of the crap.
Yeah. I mean, well, sometimes it's just, you just don't want to go back over it again. It's just exhausting, isn't it? And really, our bodies and our brain is designed not to go over it again because it reinforces those loops. So it's just time to cut the loops so that they can find a new way. And it looks like the water in the water on the floor. Like, it'll find the path of least resistance. This is it.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah. It really is.
I mean, I have to be prepared to put my big girl pants on and own it to get rid of it. But yeah.
Yeah, you still have to admit that there's, that...
And you've had a role in that.
Yeah.
And holding on to that.
And sometimes we feel like it's serving us, but often it really...
Our identity.
It's who we are. I don't want to lose who I am, but actually who you are.
I've been doing it this way forever.
It's so much better when you can release all of that and be really who you are. And that's why, I have it as your true self, is because your true self is sitting somewhere in that core waiting to actually be fully expressed and allowed to be, because we often don't allow it, or we feel like we're not allowed to show it for all the repercussions that we think exist, and that whole fear of judgment is often the reason that we do hold back.
Yeah.
How are we going to be judged? What are they going to think of me? What if I maybe lose some friends, and sometimes maybe, I don't go around and get rid of all your friends, because friends certainly are in your life for certain reasons and are to be cherished and nurtured, as long as that they're doing the cherishing and nurturing of you as well, and allowing you to keep finding who you are sitting in there, because, chances are someone else is wanting to do the same as well. Mm. Yeah. And did you find when you went through the process it being a traumatic process?
No.
Well, I say process, but it's...
Yeah.
It's just a simple close your eyes and... But...
No, the first time I thought it was a bit strange because it was a bit weird. It was too easy. That's all we're doing. When are they going to get to the real stuff? That's what I remember thinking, come on, let's get to the real stuff to get rid of my problems. But it worked. And then you open your eyes and it's not like hypnosis, because I'm a hypnotherapist as well. So it's not like that I'm changing, or EMDR, that you're changing the memory of what was there, because you can remember exactly the story and you can remember how you felt, but then but you don't feel that way, and you can't even relate to how you felt because you're just so wise to it. And so there have been some times of kind of trauma in that, but it's not the same as back when I was in trauma or experiencing life with kids and husbands and stuff like that. So, but the times that has been the case, it's because I've released something and then something else has come up really very quickly and takes me by surprise. Yeah. And so, but usually very quickly, and I know to get rid of that. But with clients, I always have to warn them because it feels way worse. Yeah. So, but that's the only time that it feels worse. And then as soon as it's done, 10 minutes later, it's gone. So, yeah. And that's what I love. And I actually love it when my clients get them. Yeah. Because that's terrible. But I love it because you know that they're going to get the biggest breakthrough. And that's the easiest one for me. That's always the easiest one. I just can get in there, do it, done, it's gone.
I know. With my very first one, I literally thought I was having a heart attack. It was so... I was quite nervous because I was like, shall I be... I've had so many patients and this is the feeling. I'm like, oh my gosh. But I'm sitting here pretty much in the middle of nowhere during our training and stuff, and I'm like, okay, where's the nearest ambulance? Or all of this sort of stuff's going through my mind, yet not wanting to take myself away, because I actually I did know in my gut that this was me releasing something. So I'm like, I'm either going to be dead and it'll be gone and released, or this is so big and holding me back so far that it's physically causing something in my body. Yeah. And then and a terrible headache that night, but I knew my body was just trying to get it detox all of this stuff.
And actually, I don't sort of have that reaction anymore. Very, very rare. But recently I had a session, and they I know it's been shared and on YouTube.
Oh yes, I haven't watched it yet.
It was probably the biggest release I'd had since I had one of those without the trauma of that suppressed stuff coming through. But it's such a different feeling now. It was, I laughed and I cried and I just could not, and I couldn't believe how big it was. It was something that I thought was really insignificant, but I was just getting creatrix because I could.
Yeah. This is what we do. So we tend to. Now you don't always have to have creatrix forever into your life.
No, but you do. But it feels good.
Yeah, it feels good. So we do it as well because we want to be that transformologist that is being able to be the best possible transformologist, that version for the clients.
Yeah.
So,
if we're holding on to stuff, we can't be there. Which is why psychologists, as great as they are, they've all got their own stuff.
I've never met a psychologist that hasn't gone into psychology because they're trying to fix themselves. And I'm sure there's some out there, but it's quite ironic that that's often why they do psychology, is to perhaps work through their stuff, and then maybe they can relate to their clients a bit better. Yeah, so what else? Anything else that you've got in regards to?
Nothing, unless you've got any other questions.
No, I think that's pretty good. And if you do have any questions, then have you got somewhere that you could...
I'll just send them through to you, and then I can you can...
So you
I
can
keep that conversation going.
Yeah, great. So you can always do Transform... Oh, gosh, what is my email? No, just head to my website, debcourtney.com, and there is a place that you can... send me an email. However, you can go to my Instagram, which is at Debs Courtney, and Facebook as well, Debs Courtney. And obviously this YouTube, which you can share, and you can also please like and subscribe. Share it with some women that you know could be doing some searching, like trying to understand themselves and trying to, maybe they've been going to a lot of gynecologists, or it could be that they're even having issues trying to just become pregnant. I know that Maz has had a number of experiences with women that are trying to get pregnant that then go through creatrix, and before you know it, or haven't had a period for years, not because they're menopausal, but because, we know, like as Kylie was saying, how much it's actually connected to our hormones and things. So once you can clear out a lot of that what we like to call shit, is that suddenly they can actually start their period again and feel like, I guess, a normal woman as we were designed to be. So there's a lot of that sort of stuff that can go on. So please like, subscribe, do all of that stuff that you can do on this sort of social media platform. And, get in touch as well. I'd love to hear from you. And I think that's, and if you want to know a bit more about epigenetics, and we are actually hoping that we are planning a retreat day here in around Perth area. So that is in our to-do list to check off, which isn't too far off. So you will, if you want to know more, you can subscribe to my newsletter as well, and I can then also let you know what's going on about that one. Thanks so much for sharing my couch.
For having me.
I finally have my picture up on the wall as opposed to laying around on the floor. It takes a little while to fully move in, and we're not fully moved in yet, but we're getting there. So thank you for coming.
Thanks.
And speak to you all soon, and see, probably in the next few days we'll be chatting again. Take care. Bye.
Bye.